Welcome to ESVN, the Emma Sports Vigeland Network show. My name is Emma Vigeland, and you know what to do, folks. Like this stream if you're watching live. Subscribe, youtube.com/ESVN show, and you can put on push notifications to know when we are going live, like when it's a long weekend. So we're going live on Tuesday, May 28th versus Monday, which was Memorial Day. Hope everybody had a lovely holiday. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast platform, rate us 5 stars. Help us out. Say hello to Bradley Alsop.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How you doing? Hanging in there?
Yeah, I'm hanging in there.
Bradley's moving.
I'm moving this week, so I'm kind of in a
End of May
scatterbrained
move.
state of mind right now, but I'm ready. I'm just about ready to lock in. So
Well, luckily we have only 7 teams in the NBA and NHL playoffs left.
The great winnowing down.
So you're going to be able to not have to focus on too much in terms of playoffs. Let's get right into it so we can get Bradley back to packing, which I'm sure he's extremely excited about.
Yeah, let's rush right through this so I can get back to my state of disarray at home.
The Celtics swept, and it was not a sweep, I think, that people anticipated in terms of the way that every game, well, 3 out of 4 games were competitive, and at least in this game 4, it looked like the Pacers were going to and win the game because they were up by 18 at one point, and they had kind of given it all they could. Reportedly, Rick basically talked about how they're looking to set up the Eastern Conference Final victory, the platform and ceremony on your home floor. What are you going to do about it? Well, I mean, that's just the kind of mind games that people, that coaches engage in for sports teams, and it's just like, yeah, of course, it's a potentially closeout situation. They're going to set up the infrastructure in case Boston does win, and they did win. And Boston went on a 20-8 run, even though, as I mentioned, the Pacers were up at 18 at one point, and they closed it out as they had all series in the fourth quarter, I think answering some questions about toughness mentally for Boston, even though they've been so dominant all year. And it was, if you're a Pacers fan, I can't even imagine that kind of frustration, because you would have hoped to at least have stolen one game and not collapse in the third, or in the fourth quarter, I should say. But it was kind of the theme of the series in that sense, where the Pacers had opportunities, but they didn't have the clutch players or the veteran presence, it seemed. Although they do have some vets on that team. But maybe just the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And the fleek is wesh.
It's on fleek.
And Jaylen Brown named Eastern Conference Finals MVP, well deserved. It's just the Celtics are who we thought they were in terms of being one of the most talented teams constructed, I think, in basketball in quite some time. Especially when you have the versatility that they do. Jaylen Brown playing so well. Jason Tatum was in foul trouble towards the end of that game, but he was able to come in and help close it out for them. Jrue Holiday has just been phenomenal as a defender all year, and in this series there was no exception. He was on Miles Turner on occasion, despite the size differences, his defensive instincts, and knowing where to be. And also Al Horford, who is now, I guess, 50 years old. Playing meaningful minutes in the fourth quarter. Bradley, what was your take on the game yesterday?
Well, I definitely feel some great levels of sympathy for Pacers fans because
we're sorry.
Because honestly, even though it was pretty agonizing as a Knicks fan in the second round, just with everything that was going on both on the court and off the court in terms of like the health problems the Knicks were experiencing. It's really hard to potentially have had a chance if a certain, dribble of the ball off a player's foot or costly turnovers in the last crucial minutes of 3 of the 4 games could have led to a 3-1 lead somehow, some way for the Pacers against the Celtics. something that obviously nobody would have or would ever have really anticipated given the talent disparities of each team. But it was honestly possible with how the Pacers were able to sort of
Well, they should have stolen that game one. I mean, that was
the game one. I think was
egregious.
probably the most
Set
the
the
one that
tone.
had the most susceptibility by the Celtics to have lost one, which would have been a real statement to win game one on Boston's own turf. But as you said, despite some of the veteran presence, I think a lot of the real focal points of the Pacers team, but specifically the offense, are the younger players. You know, Aaron Nesmith, Andrew Nembhard, Tyrese Halliburton are all young guys who are serving very much as some of the catalysts for this offense. And
I mean,
it is a lot to put on
to be
the
fair,
shoulders of
Halliburton hasn't played in 2 games, right? So I mean, that's part of it. But I didn't even think that. I thought they looked kind of good. I mean, he's definitely like you get Nembhard is a better defender than Halliburton.
Nembhard was making a lot of tough shots, which I was quite impressed by. I mean, same
TJ
thing.
McConnell's a better
Nesmith.
two-way player or a better defender, I should say.
McConnell, I think, again, to your point, if you talk about veteran presence on that team, he honestly was one of the most, impactful, players who's actually had some, if not playoff experience, just more kind of tread on his tires. However, it's a lot to ask of a young team like this to, possess the mettle and the strength both on the court and kind of just mentally to lock in and be able to face off against a team that's sort of like not. I don't even mean this in a cliche way. I mean just like actually like built for the playoffs.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
The Celtics were basically a team built to just run through this Eastern Conference, and then we will see a referendum on them as a team as they've gotten while they are in the NBA Finals. Yes, they had a slightly weaker path by only having to face the Heat, then the Cavs, then the Pacers, some hobbled teams that are less talented, no question. But you can only face who's right in front of you, and they demolished every team that they played.
Exactly.
It wasn't as if it was close in the ways where it was seemingly frustrating with the Pacers, but like when the Celtics were able to break through, and what I mean by that is, for example, in Game 1, when they were able to capitalize on the inexperience and the mistakes the Pacers made to get into overtime was not close. They got into their sets and they just dominated the Pacers.
Yeah. I mean, when they have the ability when they lock in to just be dominant in that way. I mean, they did. 2 things can be true at once, right? Which is that they were always the favorite coming out of the East by a long margin before we knew who they were going to play. Then they faced a Heat team without Jimmy Butler. Then they faced a Cavs team that lost Jared Allen, and then lost Donovan Mitchell at one point in the series. And then
without Halliburton,
the Pacers,
as you were mentioning,
right, exactly. And so, I mean, the Pacers, there was a conversation about how their walk to the Eastern Conference Finals was a lot easier. But, I mean, the East is very weak this year, or ended up being very weak with all the injuries involved. And the West was a bit of a juggernaut. But I guess, like, to turn to the West for a second, I mean, the Timberwolves have a bit of the same situation where they're young and they just don't know, they haven't been there before in the way that Kyrie and Luka have. And they haven't, I still think that almost like the Pacers played better against the Celtics than at some points the Timberwolves have against the Mavs, but that's in part due to the fact that basically Jason Kidd and that team has decided we're going to just lock in on Ant, as they did in the OKC series with SGA, and they're making it much harder for that team that's a little bit more dependent on their star player. And I know that Cat and Rudy Gobert are phenomenal in their own ways, but in terms of generating offense, they've locked in on Ant, and he's young, and it's made it quite difficult for him.
Well, and also the problem is if Ant is in any way neutralized, as it's been shown both in terms of when you're watching the games, but you see the stats, the 2-man combo of Kyrie and Luka relative to the 2-man combo of Cat and Ant, the shooting percentages and the actual made field goals, it's pretty stark.
Yeah.
So the issue that also becomes that even if Ant is neutralized, which is an understandable game plan, you want to stifle the number one scoring option as much as possible and have the other guys beat you. If Cat who, for the most part, in most circumstances, is one of the most skilled offensive big men, but specifically shooting big men. If he can't make any shots, which he has not really been able to over the last 3 games, that's a huge problem if Ant is kind of bottled up by the Mavs' more kind of havoc-wreaking defense, which they've really deployed very, very effectively. And I give credit to Luka and Kyrie both for being really, really involved and really, really determined on that end on the perimeter, when I could see potentially there being some incentive to hide them a little bit because they are so responsible for so much of the offensive workload. But they've really been contributing and making things difficult on the perimeter. And with Derek Lively, who unfortunately is not going to, I don't believe will be playing game 4.
Yeah.
He was doing a really, really great job of containing Cat and Gobert around the rim and in the paint.
Even though, like, you know, he's slighter. He's obviously slighter as a big man.
But I think what's great with Lively is that he's 20 years old, first and foremost,
Yeah, it's
which
insane.
is astonishing. A rookie getting this much, these many important minutes in the conference finals. But because he's so agile as a bigger guy, his feet slide really well. He's a good container. He doesn't foul a lot, which I think is really huge, especially as a young big man. Usually the biggest issues come from when
discipline.
Yeah, exactly. As a rookie or as a young player, it's not drawing fouls. So to replace that most likely with Daniel Gafford, who in his own right does similar things to Lively and has been very effective. He's maybe not as much of an impactful player like on the margins as Lively is. I'm curious if maybe they can exploit that with Lively out. But I'm also curious with the broader issue, which is the Lively thing is something, but I think what's more impactful is, can you contain the stars? And that's what's
the guy's generating offense. And the thing for the Mavericks, which is shown, even though the Wolves have one of the biggest rosters in the league with Gobert, with Cat, with Naz Reid, who's had a really, really phenomenal playoffs, they just aren't able to kind of distribute the ball in the same way when they lock up Anthony Edwards.
Right.
But when you have Luka and Kyrie Irving,
to say you lock up one of them, you can most likely, if you're always risking something, if you are overemphasizing covering Luka at the expense of Kyrie, or vice versa. There's always sort of a difficult trade-off to be made.
Which I guess brings us to the fact that, I mean, the level that these two guys, especially, I mean, Luka is playing through injury, and Kyrie Irving is just looking like, I mean, a dancer out there. The level that those guys are playing at right now is just phenomenal. It really is. And Kyrie Irving has refined his game even more, and I know that people who are real like basketball fans more than me are just speak about the craftsmanship that he plays with. But it's noticeable. It's beautiful basketball in every sense of the word. I mean, he's just, and the storyline of him going back to Boston is potentially amazing.
It's really impressive because I think especially there's always been. Even with, and I'll preface this by saying, when we talk about the experience level, it also does help, and I don't think it's underestimated or anything. I just think that there's sometimes with so many different narratives dovetailing from Kyrie Irving, the player, but also Kyrie Irving, the person.
Right.
It sometimes can be a little bit easy, at least for me personally, to kind of shroud that. Oh yeah, he was like an incredibly impactful player on a championship team eight years ago. So, and yes, that's a decently long time ago, and it was LeBron James on the Cavs. It was obviously a different time.
He gets the credit too, yeah.
Of course, and especially making one of the most impactful shots in that series.
Oh yeah, I mean that's like one of the
iconic moment in the finals.
Moment in NBA history.
But with that being said, obviously the turmoil surrounding going to Boston, that not working out, going to Brooklyn, that being kind of a calamity, that being something that broke up in like kind of
an unmitigated
explosive fashion
for the organization as well as for the two stars involved.
Right. I think there would be a number of ways to say after all of that, Kyrie, for whatever reason, can't necessarily be a really high impact player on a team with like championship aspirations anymore. But now what we're seeing with him in Dallas with the running mate of Luka, and with how actually, despite potential reservations of what they might do together, that I may have had at the time. With
Oh,
the
we
trade.
did have reservations.
It has worked, and he has made it very clear that is not the case. He is as much of a contributor, if not potentially in some games more so, to the Mavericks' current playoff success. And if they win one more game, it'll be put to rest that he can still do it. Yes, he's a little bit older than he was in 2016, but I think it's a testament to him now through all of that he's still and especially not only just to him as a player, but also what I think is really important too is this is not to minimize any of the controversy surrounding him, but at this point, thankfully, frankly for us as viewers, but also I think for the team, the basketball's doing the talking.
Oh, yeah.
We're not focused on sideshows or distractions right now. Kyrie Irving is just playing basketball and playing it at a really high level, and I think honestly for Mavs fans, for the team, that's all they can really ask for.
Well, he was totally nuts about COVID. I mean, and then he shared that anti-Semitic movie.
Right.
He's a conspiracy theorist, but there are things about his character that I find, makes him a complex guy. I've told you I've always, appreciated how he stood up for Standing Rock. And that was, something I cut my teeth doing, so it's near and dear to my heart. But, yeah, I mean, it's fun to watch him play in that way. And to your point about how they've been in the fourth quarter, the Timberwolves have been shrinking in the fourth quarter, and Luka and Kyrie have taken over in the fourth quarter. And I think that's really been noticeable. Do they have the team that there is going to be able to compete with a Boston Celtics team? And again, no team has come back from down 3-0 in the NBA Conference Finals ever in the history of the NBA.
It's a heavy lift, unfortunately.
It's definitely a heavy lift. So if and when most likely the Mavericks advance, with Kristaps Porzingis coming back, I think that they're probably pretty smart, by the way, to be resting their starting center at this point.
Which is another a reverse revenge game.
Yes.
For Porzingis coming from Dallas.
That's true.
So funny.
I guess I always associate the revenge for him
right,
to be
with the Knicks.
But it could have been. I mean, if God, OG Anunoby was able to stay healthy, that could have been the situation. But anyway.
But I also will say, when we're thinking about this potential Celtics-Mavs series, it's the reason I was bringing up sort of like the road for the Celtics is because I don't think, to me, there's really any dispute that this team, the Celtics team as constructed, can be really, really effective against very good teams. The issue, I think, with this playoffs is just by virtue of who they've played, we haven't seen it just because they've played teams that I would say, and I think people would agree with me, obviously, both hobbled, but both teams that even at full strength, I would take the Celtics basically 10 times out of 10.
Oh, yeah. Also, speaking of teams they beat, I want to correct myself. There were 3 stars on that Brooklyn Nets team, not 2. The third is James Harden, who, obviously also had a pretty resurgent playoffs, even though they didn't end up advancing, obviously.
He wasn't, but at the very least with the first round series, I actually wouldn't say obviously he was the problem.
He and Kyrie have elevated his play, and that's not been the case for Durant.
And the reason I was bringing that up with who they've played is that I think all you can really ask for is they kind of dominate these series, which they have.
Right.
I just think the referendum on can they get over the hump, which they have not been able to do, despite, to their great credit. I mean, I think it's either 4 or 5 out of the last 6 conference finals, and 2 or 3 of the last. Yeah, 2 out of 3 of the last NBA Finals. There was nothing to scoff at with that. I think just the question is, I think everybody, obviously Celtics fans included, want to see if the Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown led team, with I would say probably the most apt roster construction around them, with the resurgence of Derek White. With hopefully a healthy Porzingis, can they
and Drew Holiday?
Can they get over the line against a much more heavily armed Western Conference where basically nobody would have emerged without some sort of test?
Yeah.
Real test.
Right. And I mean, they also have a little bit of continuity now, that they have Missoula for a second year in a row.
Right. There's no consternation surrounding the head coach at all. Right.
And maybe that gives them an opportunity to settle in. So
I think regardless, I think it is easy as a fan and as a viewer to sort of be like, the Celtics potentially more likely than not are kind of fraudulent because they haven't had to basically play a really high impact game against a high impact opponent. But at the same time, I think dominating the inferior opponents is what you need to see from a good team to begin with, first and foremost. And two, I think as you brought it up in the beginning, but I think what is so crucial is that when Jason Tatum has struggled in playoff games, the problem has not been just Tatum struggling. It's that Jaylen Brown wasn't filling the gaps.
Yes.
And if anything, especially last season, he was actively detracting from the success of the team. He was struggling to maintain security of the ball. He wasn't hitting shots. This is a different story. He put up 40 points he put up 40 points in the I'm not sure if it was last game or game one, but obviously making the game tying 3 in game one to bring it to overtime first and foremost, and playing well enough to be pretty easily considered the Eastern Conference player of the series. So
right.
I think that is so crucial that if Brown continues to play this way, if Tatum struggles, there's such a higher floor for the Celtics than there has been before. And also, if anything, the other thing I'm interested in with the Celtics too is that I wouldn't say Tatum has played at the highest level that he's able to in this postseason, almost entirely so.
Yeah.
So if Tatum can sort of find that with Brown ascending as well, that's a difficult combo. But it's the same thing. But it's also we have to counter that with the other duo that we've talking about, which we've been talking about, which is Kyrie and Luka, who have been firing on all cylinders, basically all playoffs.
But it seemed on paper like obviously the rest of the supporting cast for the Celtics is better than the Mavericks. Obviously,
yes,
but
definitely.
Are the two stars of Luka and Kyrie playing at such a high level that it elevates the entire squad to the point where they can overcome that? That's the question. I mean, I still think, you side with the betting markets I think are going to take the Boston Celtics to win the series. They'll be the favorites. And I think that's right. But it's just about are these special players going to be able to do the most special things possible? And we see that in championships throughout sports, that can be the difference maker.
And it's so funny that I was thinking about this before you basically summed up what I was kind of thinking about with the Mavs, like what my analysis would be of the series so far. And truly, when you look back on, yes, I think the defensive scheme for the Wolves is very well constructed, and I think they're doing the right things. And I think obviously there is strategy and there is scheme. There's an intellectuality to an offensive scheme that the Mavs are deploying, no question. But a lot of it, when I look at it, is what can you really do when Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving are making shots like this or scoring like this?
Right.
There's not much to be done.
There's not much to be done.
Those are two of, if not the best players in the league, two of the best scorers maybe ever in the league.
Yeah.
In Luka and Kyrie. And if they're both doing that, it's just hard. You don't have a lot of wiggle room to battle back from that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So, I mean, I think we of course think that the Mavs are going to advance. It would be insane not to think that. And then I think we'll do there will be a break. And then we'll be able to do our NBA. Can you look up when the NBA championship is supposed to start? Actually, because I'm curious about that. I think that they just get that the time is set. All right, here we go. It's supposed to start June 6th, so we'll have ample time to do a series preview for that. And
with the Wolves, unfortunately, I hope that there's not a huge takeaway that this team, is a massive disappointment in many ways. Also, only because even if they get swept here, this is somewhere that they have not been before in basically 2 decades since Kevin Garnett was wearing the uniform.
Right.
And they convincingly beat the defending NBA champions to get where they are. It is not an easy road that they have taken, and if they're going to lose to Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving playing some of the best basketball of their careers, I know a sweep is hard to swallow for any franchise.
Absolutely.
But I hope they don't hold their heads too low given how well they've played and how much of a statement they've made in this postseason.
Absolutely. Now we turn to the NHL and the more competitive conference finals that we're seeing here. The Rangers are miraculously up 2-1 in this series against a Florida Panthers team that I was terrified about. For good reason.
I was going to say, I think with good reason so far.
They are physical, they can check like hell, and they have done a phenomenal job of shutting down the Rangers star players. But I'll recap quickly that game 3 that was played on Sunday afternoon, which gave me quite a heart attack in front of my my future in-laws. I was like, my future father-in-law was like, "Do you want to watch the game? Let's watch the game together." I was like, "Are you sure? You sure you want to watch with me?" Anyway, we had a great time, and Sam Reinhart opened the scoring pretty early on in the first period. He's had a phenomenal series. But then Lafreniere, who has been the MVP for the Igor, best skater for the Rangers so far, had an insane highlight reel goal. Then within a minute, Barclay Goodrow, who's also been stepping up, which is why they signed him to that ridiculous contract as a fourth-line player. I mean, he just is this playoff performer, specifically because he can be out in all situations as a defensive forward. He had this snipe. He went up 2-1, then the Panthers answered, Reinhart again. It was 2-2 going into the second period. And then the second period brought 2 more goals from those same guys, Lafreniere and Goodrow again. Another highlight reel goal for Lafreniere and another snipe for Goodrow. I mean, he's just like shooting the puck extremely well, and that was on a double minor penalty kill. So it was a shorthanded goal from Trocheck, who set him up really nicely as well.
I'm quite impressed with Goudreau this time around, because if I'm not mistaken, he was one of the Lightning guys for a time.
He was signed because of that championship pedigree.
I was gonna say, which also sort of makes sense to me, that it's like he's actually making good on the fact that, Sometimes guys who are championship stock on one team it doesn't necessarily always translate.
Right.
It's showing right now that for the most part, Barclay Goodrow is translating.
Oh yes.
From team to team, he's just like,
he has more goals in the playoffs than he had in the regular season. He had 4 goals in the regular season. He has 6 goals in the playoffs.
It's so crazy.
It's absolutely bonkers.
That's where the cliche serves, where it's like some guys are just sort of built for big moments, and he is making it known that he is still built for big moments.
Absolutely. And so then they go into the third period, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm terrified. How are they going to blow this? And then they totally blow it. So the Florida, they scored late in the third period to tie it 4-4. Laviolette took a timeout, a really well-timed timeout, settled the Rangers down a bit. They survived that third period, but the defense, I mean, first of all, Jacob Trouba, I was a defender of him because some of the hits, it's just like a consequence of him being bigger, and I don't necessarily know that you can take that out of the game. But that elbow is ridiculous. And he's also playing horribly as a defender.
I was also just going to say, it's like, it's worse when that is exacerbated by poor play.
And like, they can't put him anywhere. Right. So they've been putting him on the third line with Gustafsson. That was a disaster and almost cost them the series with the Canes. They put him back on the second defensive pair, the third pair with Gustafsson. They put him back on the second pair with Keandre Miller, who had his worst game as a professional athlete that I've seen. Like, he was horrible. I shouldn't say it's his worst game as a professional athlete, but it was up there. One of his worst defensive games I've ever seen.
But it's also the context that matters too. Is you're having one of your worst games in an extremely pivotal moment in the series.
Oh yeah.
And that's what I was totally about. I was thinking the same thing about Trouba. Is like, it's not necessarily excusable, but if you have a bad penalty like that or a dirty hit like that, it's not excusable. It's more like, if it's supplemented by exemplary play, it's a little bit easier to stomach. But he's been struggling basically all postseason. He's
on the penalty kill because he blocks a ton of shots, and that's part of why they feel they can't scratch him. He is a big body. That's the one good thing he's been doing, is blocking shots, right. And he will lead the team in block shots. But I mean, it's a bit of an old head hockey stat, in my opinion. I know it's important, especially on the power play, and like special teams, I get it. But
you want a little bit more from that from Jacob Trouba.
5v5, he's getting smoked throughout the entire postseason. And the other problem is that Adam Fox is so injured that it's causing issues. I mean, he's not he's the quarterback of the power play, and there is a reason that the power play has not scored yet in this series. And I'm bitching about the Rangers, but they need to actually tighten it up if they want to close things out, because I'm still terrified of this Panthers team that just has, I mean, dogs up and down the lineup. I mean, like, let's I just, like, Alexander Barkov, by the way, is eating Mika Zibanejad's lunch. Zibanejad has this problem when he's on the ice with elite centers. He had this problem 2 postseasons ago with Sidney Crosby. He sometimes is just like, when he's against these elite centers like this, and Barkov is having an incredible year, he struggles. So, I mean, Verhaeghe's been playing out of his mind, Barkov, Reinhart, and then you have Kachuk, Sam Bennett. Evan Rodriguez has been a bit of a pest, and it's hard to complain about how their top 2 defensive pairs have played as well. So, I mean, the Rangers have this magical kind of clutch thing, but they have shut down the Panthers, their top players. As I said, the power play has not scored once in this series. So Kreider, Zibanejad, and Panarin have all not scored. This was clearly the Panthers' game plan. They were playing suffocating defense on their star players, but their star players are scoring. So that's something that's immensely concerning to me. But really, I should also say it's reductive, because when people talk about how they're, you know, the Rangers are getting outplayed a bit, and they don't consider sometimes that the goalie is actually a part of the team. So it informs what they can do when they have trust in Igor Shesterkin back there to be making the most insane saves ever. And
absolutely,
he seems to get, it's almost as if Laviolette knows this, and I can't confirm it, but that he gets warmed up the more shots he takes if he can get some low danger chances, low danger shots under his belt, which is more advanced NHL analytics, or hockey analytics. But maybe that is part of the game plan, and perhaps I'm giving them too much credit for bad defense. But I do think there's something to be said where Igor gets warmed up on these low danger shots, and it gets him. He gets better in the third period or later in games.
But I think that in something I've noticed, or something I think that can be gleaned almost across sports, is that there are, I think it might slightly be anecdotal or eye test based, which is like, I don't think completely out of the question in terms of relying on that, but, and I don't say this necessarily as your observation of Shesterkin specifically, but I think there genuinely are athletes who, with more in-game reps, even if they falter early, even if there are some missteps, I think just so honestly, getting more of a download of the game, getting a few more data points as the game continues, actually buttresses their ability further in, as opposed to when they might be considered their freshest when the puck drops, or whatever the case may be, when the game starts.
Right.
You know, great. It's not one at all, but just as a reference, I always thought that sometimes with poor performances in early matches from like a guy like Novak Djokovic in tennis, is that there were games where I'd watch, I remember even this past year, a few years ago, where Djokovic would go down like 2 or 3 sets to like an unknown opponent, and then
it's a good comparison.
Maybe obviously not 3 sets, because then he would lose, but I'm saying two sets, and then it just sort of looked like, oh, the wheels are turning. He's fully understanding what the game is in front of him, and what this guy's tendencies are, and he wins 3 sets in a row.
Well, and he hits so hard too that he also just like exhausts the opponent to that
and
degree.
He doesn't get exhausted either. So it's like, so the stamina combined with sort of getting more intelligence as the game goes on. I think it's definitely possible that even if certain things might look less ideal for Shesterkin as in the beginning of the game, he has recovery ability.
Right. And I'm sorry, I have watched Rangers teams that were way too reliant on Henrik Lundqvist, okay? Yeah, so, like, I mean, but people saying it's the same thing, it's not the same thing. It's not the same team. They're actually a worse defending team, I'll agree with you, but the Rangers have way more high-octane offensive upside than they did in frickin' Ryan Callahan, Derek Stepan days. I mean, I like, let's be real here. The Rangers are a better team as constructed. They're struggling defensively for the reasons I've said. I mean, I would not be surprised if you see Zach Jones at some point in this series as the 7th defenseman getting called up because the guy needs to take some rest. There was a part of me that wished Zach Jones is starting over Jacob Trouba, because he's actually had a really good period of time when he came in for Adam Fox, who was injured during the regular season. Now he's playing through an injury to his knee that he suffered during the Carolina Hurricanes series. So, if the Rangers can hold it together with this strategy, I will. But I don't. I think this is going to be a very long series, regardless. Like I can't see. I'm expecting something bad. I'm expecting something not good to happen tonight, and for them to come back.
And it's fair because even though honestly, I've been so impressed with the Rangers' resolve in some of these close games with the Panthers, no question. And also, it's been incredibly gratifying to see kind of. I think we, of course, it's hard to say a coming out party for like a first overall pick, but it's been really awesome to see Alexis Lafreniere perform the way that he's performing in the postseason. To be like, okay, he's arrived. Like this, like there were definitely. I think I'm certain at some point we've talked about there was some consternation of like. When is he going to put every single thing together? And I think he's pulling mostly everything together. You don't
need to be sure. I am way too involved in Rangers lore to tell you that. Over this last offseason, there were people saying that he should be traded.
It seemed right. I feel
because he likes video games too much and has a social life, and also
they thought he was cod-brained.
He was a part of some sort of softball team with his buddies. And some idiot on Twitter was pointing it out, like they're concerned he has too many other interests.
Does he love hockey enough?
Guess what? Ryan Lindgren showed up today, apparently, to the rink in a hat with Lafreniere Softball League on it. So it was one of the, as a bit of a troll.
Awesome. That's so
literally
funny.
Addressing exactly what you're saying, because he's arrived. And my guy Capo Caco is not playing very well. He was healthy scratch for game 2. He came back in because Jimmy Vesey is going to be out for an extended period of time. I wish he could just be a little bit more aggressive because he does all the little things right, but he's not making plays in the way that he needs to on the third line. That has to elevate itself scoring-wise to make up for the fact that, as I mentioned, the Panthers have been very successful in shutting down the star skaters and star forwards for the Rangers.
But I see what you're saying with the potential length of the series, just because the Panthers are just so relentless, and they have their style down so incredibly well that it's just, even if you sort of know what's coming, just because of, as we talked about with their forecheck and with kind of their aggression and stuff, there are just so many guys that can beat you. We were like, oh God, like I forgot about, Sam. I mean, even freaking Sam Reinhart every 2 goals. It's like, oh, like it could be him one day, or it could be Carter Verhaeghe another day, or it could be, There's always somebody you can kind of get in there, and you're like, oh crap. Forsling, even for example, Forsling had a big play recently, a big goal recently. So it's just like they are hard to contain. But the Rangers are doing a good job so far.
Yeah. I mean, it's a similar game plan to how they survived in Carolina. The real question is, and I know I'm spending more time on the Rangers than other teams, but
we still have a vested interest in one team at the very least.
Yes. The Rangers can capitalize on this potentially. I still think that tonight's going to be a really tough go for them to come out 3-1. But they can capitalize on the Panthers getting frustrated by the volume of shots that they're taking on Shesterkin, and then they start to go,
right.
Am I taking too low quality shots? Should I be doing it like this? And then they start to overthink.
Would it almost lead them to essentially adopt a more conservative approach to try and get the most high quality shots instead of a volume of shots?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's interesting to think about going into the next game.
And if the Rangers can finally kind of get some of their offensive stars more involved.
Yeah, totally.
And so this Western Conference final in the NHL has also been phenomenal. Last night, the game started off with a McDavid assist to Zach Hyman. I think he was the first goal scorer. And then a McDavid goal on the power play, which was a tap-in. And this was just like an ideal start at home for the Oilers. But then the Stars' depth takes over, and I'm flipping back and forth between this and the Pacers Celtics game, and I come back after like 5 minutes watching the basketball, and it's 3-2 after they were down 2-0 going into the second period, and the Stars scored 3 goals in under 4 minutes. They took a 3-2 lead. In the end, Adam Henrique did tie it up going into the third period, but then Robertson completed his hat trick, went up 4-3, empty net goal. The Stars stole one in Edmonton, and Jason Robertson having this hat trick is huge because the starting center for that line, Rupe Hintz, has returned to that game. He's been out since midway through the Avalanche series with an upper body injury, so probably a concussion. And he assisted on 2 of those Robertson goals. So
yeah, Hintz is awesome.
He was essential in kind of unlocking their young goal scorer, Jason Robertson. And so the Stars are now 6-1 on the road in this postseason.
Damn, that's crazy.
Their depth is just they are scary. They are both battle tested and completely deep in ways that how I feel about the Dallas Stars. And Jeff Skinner wasn't horrible in this game, but that 4th goal that he let in on to let Robertson
Stuart Skinner.
Oh wait, what did I say?
Jeff Skinner.
Jesus.
That's he's just in Buffalo.
Yeah. Stuart Skinner was not horrible. The 4th goal he let in was not good though. That was a Robertson again, he did not seal off the side of the net, and Robertson tapped it in. He didn't hug the post. But
Robertson's
again,
crafty like that.
Oh yeah.
He is just a full complement of moves. When he gets going, he is a immensely fun guy to watch score goals.
But this is the first time in the playoffs that the Oilers have lost back-to-back.
Wow.
They've been able to come back. Knobloch has shown a real kind of resolve for the team, which is why I was excited about them, I guess,
And I took a listen, I think, when I was because of you mentioning him, and kind of his almost like his demeanor and his constitution.
Yeah.
And it's very impressive because he basically almost, and I mean this in a good way, especially for a team like the Oilers who have a lot of expectations, a lot of star power. He barely registers a pulse when he talks.
Oh yeah.
Which I think is, in the sense, I almost think I would think that's actually a plus, because he's essentially establishing that he's not overreacting to anything or submitting to pressure.
Yeah.
He's just sort of we're staying the course and we are playing the game that we're going to play and we're going to win.
Right. I mean, and I Pete DeBoer is definitely, I would say, more demonstrative.
Yes, I mean, even in his Devils days, I remember him as a more demonstrative coach.
Yeah.
Sure.
Speaking of, I mean, now you're the Sheldon Keefe, new head coach of the Devils.
So that's
mixed feelings on that front, I would say.
Well, we were wondering. I mean, especially after the Lindy Ruff firing, and there being an interim
improvement over that.
Yes, that was I think much needed. Even it'll be interesting because obviously Keefe was fired from Toronto because of the shortcomings of getting to the postseason and not delivering. So the Devils have even just had the problem of getting to the postseason in the last few years, besides last year. So we'll see if Keefe can help them on that front. But
what's fascinating is that the top 3 scorers left in the playoffs in terms of playoff scoring so far: Leon Draisaitl, Connor McDavid, Evan Bouchard, all on Edmonton.
Literally all Oilers.
All Oilers.
Crazy.
And yet they're down in this series. I mean, that's the thing about them, is they can let up a lot of goals, but they can score a lot of goals. Draisaitl has 25 points, as does McDavid, and then Bouchard. And then after that, it's Vincent Trocheck, tied with Tkachuk for 4th and 5th place there in terms of playoff scoring. But
that's also why for now, even though I think the Stars have really been looking the part, with everything we've talked about, with their depth, with their offensive firepower, I'm not counting out the Oilers, only because if Skinner can tighten it up a little bit, and if the defense can tighten it up a little bit, they can just, there's a 15 to 20% tightening of in goal and on defense could potentially just swing the series for Edmonton. So if that can happen, I think they could totally even bring this to potentially 7 games or something.
It is, I think, though, somewhat what we're seeing is that why the Stars are scary is that they have depth in the way that the Rangers do. Both of these teams are well constructed, and
multiple lines that can be in a number of ways. Yeah,
and if it's not working with their star guys, they can probably get they have defensemen that can jump up in the play. They can rely on their goaltending and Jake Ottinger, and that is part of what creates success, is having multiplicity in that way.
Wyatt Johnstone, the on the Stars, the guy who kind of had a bit of a sort of coming out of last year's playoffs.
Yeah, they're third liner.
He's a young, energetic guy who kind of took over a game or two, if I'm not mistaken, in the last series. And he's just and as you said, third line. That's a guy. I
believe he's on the third line. Don't take me to
But all in the sense that he's someone even below, for example, I as we were saying, Robertson, Heiskanen, Hintz, like he is, and yet he's someone who could potentially light up a game and be the spark plug to put them over the edge. Like they're dangerous on a number of different levels.
Absolutely.
So I think it'll be continually interesting to see how these two teams kind of strategize around one another. Stars versus depth, almost. And funnily enough, the Stars are actually less on the Stars than they are on the Oilers.
Oh, wordplay.
I still fucking got it.
All right, let's wrap up here with this actually pretty important story for the future of college athletics. Late last week, the NCAA and the Power Five conferences, which for people that are not familiar is the SEC, the ACC, the Pac-12, Big Ten, and the Big 12, they ended up settling in this kind of landmark agreement that basically begins the end of amateurism as it relates to college sports, and opens the door for schools to have to pay their athletes. Now, they're not mandated to. I want to be clear here. But this was a part of a class action lawsuit where there were 3 separate antitrust lawsuits that ended up getting packaged into one class action. And this is a major settlement that is around $2.8 billion in payouts that's going to happen. And so this basically means that the amateurism model, which the NCAA has been relying on since the turn of the 20th century, early 1900s. Basically, it's deemed that under this agreement, they're not going to be able to use that model anymore. It was chipped into by the NCAA basically being told that it's illegal for you to restrict name, image, and likeness usage for your athletes who now use NIL money to supplement their performances. But now, basically, because of this agreement, $2.77 billion, the NCAA and the conferences are ordered to pay that amount of money over 10 years to more than 14,000 former and current college athletes who say now defunct rules prevented them from earning money from endorsement and sponsorship deals dating back to 2016. And now, this is the key part, for the Power Five conferences, there's a compensation model that they have created. Now, again, this is not mandated, which needs to be the next step, but schools are permitted to set aside up to $21 million in revenue to share with the athletes that are their employees that they don't pay. So if you want to be a competitive school, you want to compete for a championship, you want to be a part of like this NCAA lore, you better set aside that compensation to get the athletes that you want to come to your school, because they're going to ask, am I going to be earning money here as a part of my NIL money?
And one way you could look at it, Emma, is that
free market.
I was gonna say one way you could look at it is these schools are now free to allocate these resources contingent upon the conditions of what some might call a market.
Yes. Although
curious.
What's going to be difficult, I think, is that why this needs to be mandated and there needs to be a system in place is because this is going to raise some Title IX questions. Like when they have up to $21 million that they can share with their student athletes. Right.
Good point.
What are they going to do? Like they're going to allocate all that. Say Alabama's going to allocate all of that allotted fund to the football team or to the basketball team for the men's. Like
equal distribution or somewhat equal distribution or whatever becomes the
will that be the next
question.
Lawsuit if they don't get ahead of this crap?
Right.
Especially as we're seeing more and more female sports and athletes like women's college basketball because of the Caitlin Clark effect, but also because the sport is just doing so well right now.
It'll become much more necessary to have that conversation prior to before, in the sense of after, as you're saying, in the wake of the so-called Caitlin Clark effect, it's not going to be as sufficient to just sort of keep or render the women's NCAA tournament
Yes.
as a sideshow,
Right.
or as like something that does not require an investment dollars, because it will. And now that they have, as you were saying, especially maybe as soon as the fall 2025 season, that those resources will be there to be allocated. As you're saying, it's a question of how will they be allocated.
And I think this is the point where this is when it's going to start to become more lucrative and make more sense legally for these Power Five conferences to create their own Super League, as we already knew was going to start to happen, or like the SEC and ACC team up, because then they can just focus on that revenue sharing going towards the athletes in their eyes that are making all the money for the university, even if they are, doing so for like sexist and cynical reasons. They have to now be forced to acknowledge that that is a profit-making enterprise, that the University of Georgia isn't giving the kids there the student athlete experience. They're profiting off their labor.
I'd be curious if in that, obviously I think this question would be answered with more detail surrounding the actual implementation of the money. But I'm curious, with that Super League idea in mind, could teams and I don't even know if this would be equitable or even legal under the agreement. To be clear, I'm curious if there's a Super League, or if some of these conferences continue to merge, would they think of an idea of, hey, could we somehow legally pool all of our money together,
right,
as almost like a broader
revenue sharing,
and kind of divvy out resources almost as like a block or a conglomerate, as opposed to a school by school,
as a league,
right? Exactly, as like an actual league, as opposed to like a conference for student athletes.
Yes, they're tripping over their own dicks into a a model like the NFL, like the NBA.
It's like we're cutting the cord so we can get a bundle of different streaming services, like cable.
Right. I mean, they're being forced. Exactly. They're being forced into it, which is a wonderful thing to behold. But they could have avoided all of this litigation
just by doing it.
They could have avoided the back pay. I mean, this settlement is in large part so large because they have to pay for these other athletes. And by the way, I should mention, it's only starting in 2016 because that's the scope of the lawsuit. But if you are a student athlete, you are going to get some of this back payments as a result of this settlement for your labor, which is really exciting. But I do have concerns, as I mentioned, about the equitable structure of it, what it means for female athletes, what it means for athletes that are contributing a lot individually to like revenue for their schools, but may not be to the whole of the NCAA. I mean, it depends on the school. It's so different, right?
Yeah, like as an example, the University of Nebraska women's volleyball team literally just last year attracted like the biggest single game sporting crowd in college athletics history, or something like that, or maybe it was for their sport, but it was like a record-setting crowd.
Right.
Nebraska's football and basketball teams right now, respectively, suck ass.
Yes.
And so, is it still just because there's just more visibility and exposure to football that money might go just more still siloed towards the football and basketball teams, despite, by all accounts, the Nebraska women's volleyball team definitely being much more of a draw for that very school? So to your point, it's definitely, there are going to be case by case renderings where the inequity of it, or the misallocation potentially will become much clearer.
They're gonna get sued, and they deserve to get sued. My point is just like, I mean, to your point, I'm agreeing with you. Like, they could have got ahead out of all of this if they actually just put something in place. But this is gonna set up a wild, wild west situation, as we said, unless they immediately spin off to some sort of super league. But there's too much inertia with these old, like, honestly, relics of slavery in some of these institutions. I mean, they're just like, they're deeply conservative by their nature in every sense of the word.
And to your point with the revenue sharing, that would standardize this to a degree. It would standardize as obviously in professional leagues, but I'm saying where it wouldn't be, it would be analogous to, like, now that they're paying players and there's a fund, and if the revenue sharing isn't there, I'm saying as an example of, like, if this were happening in the NBA, it'd be like, oh, like the four biggest media markets are going to get the most of the revenue sharing, but like everyone is going to get a big piece of the pie except for like the Charlotte Hornets and the Orlando Magic.
Yep.
If that were the case, the Hornets and the Magic would be like, hey, we did not agree to this, that we're not getting the same piece of the pie or a piece of the pie based on our like projections or whatever. We're going to sue the league.
Yeah.
As you're saying, that's probably what we're looking at.
Yes.
Is that if a certain group or a certain school with certain athletes gets stiffed by this, the same problem is going to be afoot, which is that my labor is still being exploited at the expense of some sort of capital allocation that we're not seeing.
Which does bring me to the point where, like, this is where that Dartmouth case plays into this, which is like, if these players start to get a union, then they can collectively bargain,
Exactly.
and that's what needs to happen, as has been the case with the other leagues that we're talking about.
If college sports like this is going to be financialized in this way, the student athlete moniker must be destroyed forever, and they have to coalesce to become what they actually are, which is
a workforce.
Workers.
Yeah,
Laborers.
workers.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Not student athletes, but athletes, professional athletes, semi-professional, whatever you want to call it, but like athletes who are working for money and therefore have a vested interest in negotiating with their bosses to get fairer terms for the work that they're providing.
Absolutely. All right, folks. We are. I'll read just a few IMs here.
Oh, I just think it's just 1 second. Sorry, I just think
Yeah.
it's funny that two things actually. I was mentioning the University of Nebraska, and I'm wearing my Kowalski Family Farm shirt.
Look, the universe is all coming together.
I'm a shill for Big Ag.
Apparently, and also big GOP, obviously.
That's right,
Kowalski,
of course.
Republican presidential candidate.
The hottest
Senate
Republican,
candidate.
the hottest Republican Senate candidate out there.
That's what Bradley said.
And two, someone in the chat, I think it might have been Lanzetta, our esteemed mod. I just want to point out that we've hit 13,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Oh, good. Without me putting in any effort.
Yeah, so thanks, guys. Appreciate you very much.
Into advertising the show. I just want the show to exist where it does, and people can come and enjoy it.
We're having a good time.
We're just here to have a good time, basically. This is my social life.
Yes, right. We're on mic in front of a camera, but still just chatting, hanging out.
Yeah, I realized the other day that I don't spend much time with women at all anymore.
Someone clip that.
I'm with you guys all the time, right? 3 guys.
You're one of the guys.
I'm
You're
one of the
boys.
guys. Even when Brandon and
That's right. It's also
Binder
2 more
joined,
men.
2 more men. I live with my fiance. I don't do that much during the week anymore now that I've turned 30. I'm not going out to a bunch of dinners, and my 2 of my 3 best or 4 best girlfriends are very pregnant right now.
And right, so there's also they're also not really going out.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh my God, I hang out with dudes all the time. It's got to be rubbing off on me.
Yeah, Emma's in her dudes rock stage.
I really am. I mean, anyway, so with that said, I'll read a few IMs and then we will get out of here. Hope in Work and Joy and Leisure said, wait, I did D2 track and field from 2016 to 2020. Am I going to get a payout for this? Well, something to look into. I don't know if D2 is going to apply because it's not a part of the Power 5.
Power 5 agreement, right?
It's a Power 5 agreement.
So far, obviously. But.
Yeah, so no. Will from Indiana, welp, that sucked. I'll be okay, but man, what a collapse for these 3 games. I'm certainly not one to blame injuries, especially with how the Pacers advanced, but I do feel for Howling not playing in the last couple of games. That said, I love this playoff run and can't wait for future runs as long as they keep the squad together. I'm not calling for him to be fired, but man, Rick Carlisle needs to get an effing grip. Oh my God, so much of my frustration in these last couple of rounds with him either bickering with officials or not having his team prepared for closeout situations. Anyway, kudos to Sam Celtics and good luck with the Rangers. Emma left to ESVN. Thank you, Will. Yes, an incredible season for your Pacers. The future is really bright. I thought that Pascal Siakam trade is exactly what they need.
I think it's already paying dividends, and hopefully they can
they need some more defensive intensity. Halliburton needs to become a better 2-way player, but that's going to come. I think hopefully.
I have friends who are Pacers fans, and I said something similar, which is that Halliburton being out for any time I think would have spelled the doom for the series, just because. Despite some of his defensive limitations, he's just such a dynamic scorer from 3 and from and with his passing ability, honestly, to get other guys open, and I also hope that the Pacers some people were kind of making the comparison, like, oh, like maybe the Hawks, like maybe the Pacers are going to be like the Hawks in 2021, where they almost feel like they've arrived because they had a kind of Cinderella-ish run to the conference finals and then didn't make enough changes because they're like, oh, we got to the conference finals, we're good. I hope that the Pacers don't do that, not because I think their Pacers are incredibly flawed. I just more mean I think this team, where it is, can only get better with some specific improvements, as you were saying, some defensive intensity, maybe another really solid vet, to kind of tie them together, kind of be more of an adhesive for these young guys to kind of mature and grow and be ready for this moment when they're back in it.
Right. Certified lover boy, certified libertarian says, I have been wondering why your takes have been so misogynistic lately, Emma. And the final I am of the day, Tom Lofink, happy Tuesday. In rugby, both the Wales men's and women's teams had a poor Six Nations, with all the men losing in all 5 games and the women losing 4 games out of 5. Also, Welsh rugby superstar Lewis Rees-Zammit has signed for the Kansas City Chiefs. I've seen that. Also, Emma, apologies if my joke about you causing Britain's general election was over the line. Absolutely not. Never over the line, Tom. Don't worry about it. All right, guys. Thanks so much. We appreciate you all. We will see you next week, where we'll be able to... I don't know. We'll be able to give an NBA Finals preview. Probably not with the NHL. Probably not. But pray for me. All right. See you next week.
Bye-bye.